They are three nations that have been the focal point between the massive battles of the French and the Germans. Today we're going to be talking about the BeNeLux, otherwise known as the United Netherlands. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Geopolitics with Tyberius D. Of course, I am yours truly, and we're going to be talking about some geopolitical matters. I've decided that we're going to go back to more of my area of speciality. Now, granted, I'm still not a super expert in some of these affairs. My history's a little spacey on this particular one, but I'm going more back to Western Europe and North America for a couple episodes, and I haven't had time to really do the research that I want to do for a couple of topics. I really wanted to do Brazil and Argentina, but I just don't know enough about them. I know their general climatology and geography, but it's just like their history is really off, and I don't want to just sit there about stuff that I don't feel like I know enough. So whenever I find time to actually do my studying and catch up with this kind of thing, well, we'll definitely be doing some more episodes outside of my purview. But until then, today we're going to be talking about the BeNeLux, which is otherwise known as the United Netherlands, as we said in the intro. But this is the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg, if anyone is wondering. And these all have a kind of common history, and they're just too small to do their own nation's justice. But before we begin, I'll just simply say that we want to thank our geopolitical patrons, Fallen Order, Andrew Wagner, The West Dude, Julia, Drew, and Samantha. You guys make this show possible. You make it worth doing. Thank you very much for your patronage. And let's get this started. So, I almost want to start with the geography first, because it makes sense as to why, and then we can talk a little bit about the history. And so, we're going to change this up, and we're going to say, what is the geography here? It's this low-lying area in the North European plain, outside of the Ardennes forest, which is a little bit more hilly. And this is in southern Belgium. But it's basically a portion of the North European plain that is largely open. It's very, it's like a corridor between northern France and northern Germany. The problem with it is that it doesn't really have any natural barriers of defense, but it doesn't fall in to the population groups that we call French and German. The majority of people that live here are the people that we now know as the Dutch, and they live throughout most of the Netherlands and what we call Flanders. And they've kind of been the people that really settle and congeal here. Now, don't tell the Dutch this because they hate when they hear this, but they're a large degree people that used to be Germanic, but they've kind of pulled apart far enough that they're no longer as Germanic as, Germans. They don't speak German anymore. They speak Dutch. And if you listen to them, you can definitely tell they're very related. They have a lot of common root words. They have a lot of commonality. But it is a definitively different language. And it's not like French or English that has been like completely interwoven with other languages to the same degree. It's had a lot less intermingling. And so you can almost call the Dutch German light, but they're definitively not German. And it's in their language, it's in their culture. They're very similar. They have a lot of commonalities, but they definitively see themselves as a different people. Now, there's a few other people that we can talk about in here, like the Wallonians, which is actually my ancestry is Walloon. But the long and the short here is that largely the Walloon are French, and then the Luxembourg is a largely German state that just refuses to be part of Germany. So largely this is more about the Netherlands than anybody else. But we'll talk about the other peoples, or not the other people, but the other nations that kind of exist here and why. So most of this history, I'm going to simplify in a nutshell, is largely the history of this being a battleground between the Germans and the French. Now, this isn't specifically that way. We can talk about how the rise of the Franks basically came to dominate this region for a good time, and then the Holy Roman Empire under the Germans would rule this area for a while, and then it would largely be during the wars of imperialism, the area between the two lands that was kind of cordoned off or given out as a buffer zone. In fact, this is half the reason why Belgium actually exists. Is not because the Belgians are their own people, nor as much as it's a qualified buffer state between France and Germany. So there's quite a lot I can put here. We talked a little bit about the Holy Roman Empire, and we talked about the Frankish kingdom under the Merovingians and then Charlemagne in the France episode, Holy Roman Empire a lot in the German episode. But the real history here is largely what happens as the Holy Roman Empire kind of starts going to crap. Is that this land is seen as very valuable, and it's pretty good land. It's actually the most densely populated land in Europe right now, and that is it's basically the United Netherlands. And what we saw through history was that this land eventually gets to be in charge of whoever becomes the Holy Roman Emperor. And that will be, for a little while, it'll be known as the Spanish Netherlands, and for a while it'll be known as the Austrian Netherlands, because it's so rich and so important that it's pretty much it was for a while too strategic to not control. Is that basically if you wanted to be, one, rich, but two, also control like the geopolitical advantage within what's going on in this region, is that you definitely wanted like a stake there. And in fact, both Spain and Austria will rule this region for quite some time. I can't remember who broke or which one had it first. I apologize. Just my history is a little goofy and my head hurts a little bit, to be honest. But eventually, I believe it was Austria had it first, and then the Spain gets it later, because I'm thinking that the Dutch actually fight their War of Independence against the Spanish. Could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. And what really happens here is that after a while of getting ruled and a little while of seeing people's armies and troops march through, particularly during the 30 Years' War, is that the Dutch really kind of make themselves their own definitive people. And this is largely brought about by the rise of the Protestant Reformation, where the Dutch actually go Protestant and they see most of the people around them still remain Catholic, particularly the French. And so they kind of build out their own ethnic, religious, cultural identity off of that. Is that they are a different people, and they see themselves as such, and they want to rule themselves. So this largely starts the time where the Dutch become their own people. And what kind of happens here is, while the imperial powers will largely try to keep them under heel, one, the Dutch really are hesitant to actually be a part of that, and they fight all against it a lot. But the other side of this is pretty straightforward, in that the other imperial powers will largely use this as kind of like the Afghanistan project for whoever's invading it. So if the Germans are trying to rule the area, or the Spanish are trying to rule the area, the French will just fund the Dutch. And that kind of just becomes the norm, is that whoever is kind of violating the status quo of the region, the other imperial powers will back the people who are there. So if the Germans are there, the Germans are there, then the British and the French basically fund everybody, and then vice versa. If the French actually showed up, then the Germans come in to help. It becomes basically geopolitical chess, and this is like the wild card. And so it kind of gets to this point of leverage, to where if you touch the place, then they're automatically going to side against you. And the long and the short here, at least as a general overall, is the Dutch largely maintain their national sovereignty from the help of other people. And this will kind of get extended off into the Belgians and Luxembourg as it goes on. Luxembourg was part of the United Netherlands and the Dutch crown for a while, although I think it was inversed. I think the ruler of the Netherlands, or of Luxembourg, actually became the ruler of the Netherlands. But I digress. What's really important here, at least in their history, is that the Netherlands eventually gets its own independence, and they kind of go for full control of the entire region of the BeNeLux, but they really can't keep it. One, what the land that we call Belgium still largely remains Catholic, and there's some give and take here, but they don't really see themselves as full Dutch, even though the Flemish, the people from Flanders, are actually Dutch. They speak Dutch, they are Dutch. The only difference is that they tend to be more Catholic. And then you have the Wallonian or the Walloon, which are the Wallonians, however you want to pronounce it. They're actually French. They speak French. They are French. They are Catholic French, but they didn't really want to be part of France because they got tired of being marched on by the French. And so you kind of have this formation of Belgium that comes out around 1800, particularly after Napoleon, where the British are trying to divide up the French Empire after it's finally pulled apart after Napoleon. And they give this land, they say, look, what do you want to do? We're going to make you part of the Netherlands again. And they're like, no, we don't want that. And they said, all right, what do you want? And they said they wanted their own independence. And this is actually how you get the Kingdom of Belgium in a nutshell, is that they are people that are literally a combination of French and Dutch that don't want to be French or Dutch and basically want the security backing of the great powers, which is largely what happens. In fact, the reason that Britain officially goes to war in World War I is to defend Belgium from a treaty from 1831. And this is 1914. So you can see how, how seriously this gets taken. There's a few notes in history we can put in here. We can talk about the colonies of the Dutch. They become quite a colonial power in their own right. They literally, New York is actually New Amsterdam at one point. They take it over from the Swedes, and then the Dutch will have it taken over from the English. But they'll actually go and colonize a very populated part of the world, which we now call Indonesia. The entirety of what is Indonesia today, the reason its borders is what it is largely because it is what was the Dutch colonies. There's a reason. I mean, the Malay are different people, but Brunei and the northern part of Malaysia on Borneo should probably be part of Indonesia, and the only real reason it's not is because that part was ruled by the British and the rest of Indonesia was ruled by the Dutch. And so, I mean, I could be wrong here. I don't think the Malay are on North Borneo, but I could be wrong here. But the long and the short here is that the Dutch would go out and they would colonize Indonesia, and it was pretty normal for for an imperial colonial possession. But the difference here is that, one, there wasn't enough of the Dutch to kind of really force themselves upon these groups of peoples in the way that the British could do for like India. And so you didn't see a massive religious transformation here like you do in some other colonies. You didn't see a large cast of like white rulers that would come in and rule everything, even though there would be a little bit of that. It's just, it wasn't nearly as prevalent in the Indonesia as what you see in the rest of the colonies of like Britain and France and all those. They just didn't have the population for it. And so as just a general whole here, just to pull everything back together, is that, how do I put this? The Dutch ruled the place for a while. They become part of the spice trade, which is the Dutch East India Company. You may have heard of it. They get into the spice trade. They make a bit of money for a while, and then basically come World War II, they decolonize and they give up Indonesia, and they pretty much just look inward from there on out. The Belgians will have one colony, and that is in Africa, and it's called the Congo, which is now known as the Democratic Republic of Congo, I believe. Sometimes I get it confused because of it with its next door neighbor. But it used to be known as Zaire. And it's got a long, horrible history, and the Belgians did not treat the Congolese very well. In fact, it's actually one of the worst genocides ever. And it's something that Belgium is very poorly known for, as the Congo was actually the personal property of the crown prince or the crown king of Belgium, which was Leopold I. Bad things happen. A lot of people die. Famine, starvation, genocide, death. Unironically, for a nation that was really tiny, they really racked up quite a body count. And so it's pretty nasty. And then Luxembourg obviously didn't have any colonies, and Luxembourg is largely there because they are like these largely Germanic but semi-French people that are literally the borderland, kind of like Switzerland, but they never really wanted to be under anybody's particular rulership. And basically, the long and the short here, at least for them, is that anytime that the French said that they wanted Luxembourg to be part of their land, the Germany would say no, and vice versa. And so you have the independent state of Luxembourg. So that's kind of this conversation in a nutshell, is that it's largely the land in between the great powers. And it's kind of like the Korea of the area, except, worse. These peoples are developed. They're definitely like what we'd call Western Europeans. They're in undeveloped countries. They have high standard of livings. But their history has largely just been a geopolitical chess piece, because the Dutch don't want to be, they're not German enough to be German, and they sure as hell ain't French. And then the Belgium's just weird. Belgium's literally the land of I'm not you, piss off, even though they are. Kind of like the Canadians, where they don't accept the Americans. So yeah, this is kind of that. The geography in a nutshell, we talked about it a little bit, is that it's part of the North European plain. It doesn't have a lot of natural resources to any kind of degree. It's got a little bit here and there, but nothing that we would build out a general economic or major economy with. A lot of it is based on two things. Number one, it's based on being a temperate climate, very similar to northern France and northern Germany, where it's the weather's kind of nice. You can grow food, you can grow agriculture, and it's actually really good for the soils there. But it's largely predominated on its access to the sea, particularly Netherlands. Hell, Netherlands has literally been the only country to try to take their land from the sea, and they've succeeded quite well. But the general trend here, the general get, is that these lands are they're not a bad place to live, but they're not unified under a major geopolitical entity like somebody else would be. And because of that, they're kind of stuck as the way of like the shrimp between two whales kind of thing. Same way that Korea is. They're largely at the behest of their neighbors. And if you look throughout history, they do get invaded a lot. The last time that they got invaded was by Germany back in 1940, when Germany decided they were going to invade everybody, because that's just what Germany decided to do then. And they took out Holland in like a week. They took out Holland, Belgium, and Luxembourg all in one fell swoop, which is ironic because they tried doing that in 1914, and they took over pretty much all of Belgium, but they didn't invade Luxembourg to my knowledge. Maybe I'm wrong. And they didn't invade Holland, but this time they did, and they just took out everybody, and it was really quick under the Blitzkrieg. During the Cold War, they became official NATO members. In fact, the NATO headquarters is actually in Brussels, Belgium. They do have some political pull here in that regard, is that they're largely seen as like intermediaries now. In that if there's ever like a major European conference or scuffle, like the capital of the European Union officially is Brussels. So it kind of gives you the idea here, is that it's kind of the land in between the lands, and it's like the ultimate compromise ground at this point. It's where everybody comes together to have the big diplomatic conference. So yeah, that's it. I hate to just do a 20-minute episode, but I mean, the future for this land is largely what it's been for the last like 300 years. It's probably going to be a continued geopolitical battleground between the French and the Germans, and unless somebody just comes to dominate the entire region, expect that to change, or expect that to be the norm. But yeah, if you guys have any questions about the BeNeLux, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg, feel free to contact me on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Those are the easy ways to get a hold of me. I thank each and every one of you for watching. I know it's a short episode, but that's all I got for the moment. I will have some extra content for you guys coming out here soon, as the end of my month and my billing period for the podcast is coming up. And I think I might throw one of the Mask Off episodes at you guys, because it's really fun, and I want to kind of like promo that for you guys a little bit. But yeah, I've been Tyberius D for Geopolitics with Tyberius D. We'll be chatting with you guys soon about some other things. The next episode will be, and I apologize, I might have forgot here. Next episode will be Poland. So we're going to have quite a bit more to talk about on that episode. But since I don't have a co-host and I don't have anyone to ask me questions, and it's literally 4:30 in the morning and I'm recording this, there's just nobody here to really spice up the mood. So thank you all very much for watching. I've been Tyberius D, and we'll catch you next time. See you guys later.